In fact, I got the perfect colleague to come up here and talk as a CPA and accountant. He's probably seen a lot of small businesses. He's probably seen a lot of tax burden come on to businesses. And I'm not sure those tax burdens have ever lowered the cost of that company doing business. But I'd like to welcome Congressman Conaway from Texas.
Well, I thank my colleague for hosting the hour tonight and his work on this issue of trying to educate the American people as to what we're doing here. I would, as a kind of a spinoff of your comment earlier, I think our colleagues on the other side do have a plan, but they're not explaining the plan fully to the American public. Their plan is to promote anything but oil and gas and fossil fuels. And that's fine. If we can have a legitimate philosophical debate and argument and disagreement as to whether or not we should continue to exploit fossil fuels. But in that conversation ought to be the cost of changing to a non-fossil fuel environment. And so I would argue that the policies that have been put in place over the last 15 months have been specifically garnered to reduce America's production of fossil fuels. They've been specifically put in place to cause other alternatives, or so to raise those costs makes other alternatives more competitive in the market. But what we've not done a very good job of, what they've not done a particularly good job of, is explaining to the American public that these alternative sources have a cost. If it were already cheaper to produce electricity any other way than the way we're currently doing it, we'd be doing it that way. I mean, that is the American model. If it were already cheaper to power our automobiles and trucks and planes any other way, we'd be doing that. And so as we look at these policies that are being put in place by our colleagues on the other side, they are specifically intended to raise costs on our businesses, raise costs on American businesses, raise costs to consumers. When you raise costs to businesses, those businesses compete in a global environment. They compete with companies around the world who may have a different cost structure than they do. And to the extent that our costs here are higher than other places in the world, particularly as it relates to energy, then our companies will be less competitive. And the less competitive our companies become, the fewer jobs that are available for Americans to take. So you can kind of get a sense of this death spiral that we put ourselves in by making ourselves less competitive. The cold hard facts are that energy costs over my lifetime and your lifetime will continue to increase. There's no other way to get around it. That is going to happen. But those increases should not be as dramatic as the increases that my colleague has shown on the floor. We can manage and work towards slowing those increases down, making those increases much more manageable and easier to deal with if we had a rational, pro-production, pro-supply policies that we were putting in place. If we make a decision that we want to go totally green, that we want to go to a zero carbon footprint, that has immense costs that we have to agree. And if we collectively agree that those are costs that we want to bear, then let's go do that. But at this point, in this juncture in time, no one's talking about the costs of moving to the style of energy production that my colleagues on the other side want to do. As an example, Section 526 in the energy bill that was passed in December prevents any federal agency from contracting with sources of energy, and if they can't prove that the life cycle greenhouse gases are less than they would have otherwise been. Well, that has a cost to it, because that means our federal agencies, including the Department of Defense, can't buy energy from Canada. Now, do you want to buy energy from Canada, who has never, we share a long border with those guys. It's a democracy, and we go to war together. We don't go to war with each other. Or do you want to buy crude oil from countries who hate our guts, from regimes that would just as soon America go away as look at us? So what Section 526 does, well-intentioned, but misguided in its impact, is that it says, all right, you can't buy unconventional sources of energy like gas to liquids, like oil shale, like tar sands, other kinds of areas, unless you can prove, quote unquote, that the greenhouse gas cycle is less. These are policies that our colleagues on the other side are putting. They are policies intended to increase costs to American consumer. They simply won't say that, but if you look at the impact that those policies have, they're specifically set to reduce American supply of energy. If you reduce our supply of energy in a growing demand circumstance, Straight economics tells you that your costs are going to be higher. So as we move toward what we would all agree is a laudable goal, and that is making America dependent on energy sources that are within American control, that are environmentally responsible, let's look at the costs of how we make those moves. If we want to make them dramatically and unprepared, then fine. Those are dramatically higher costs than would have otherwise need to be the deal. So the basic points are costs will go up over the rest of our lifetime. We ought to do what we can to manage those costs, prevent the spikes that we see in those dramatic impact there, because businesses and consumers have a difficult time dealing with spikes. They can deal with a gradual increase over time because that's just the way the normal things work. But spikes hurt us in trying to plan for and be competitive in the world markets. Let's come clean as to what all of these costs for carbon tax or global warming or climate change, whatever it is. Our colleague from Michigan has said it ought to be 50 cents a gallon for gasoline. I don't know if that's the right number, but at least he put a dollar value on the ideas of how we move toward less dependence on sources of energy, in this instance fossil fuels. But the phrase energy independence is a misnomer. We will never have a world where we aren't dependent on energy. We have to have energy to turn the lights on in this building. What the phrase should be is that we are not dependent on energy from sources that we don't control, from sources in countries who hate our guts, from sources that when we give them money, they turn around and take that money and do bad things to American citizens. So we can have an energy policy that makes sense, that's responsible to the environment, but doesn't raise costs dramatically and arbitrarily on the American consumer. I appreciate my colleague giving me a chance to rant a bit tonight and participate in our conversation, and I yield back.